This is a true story, narrated by the owner of the YouTube channel, Mr. Hao Ghost Story. The story is divided into 3 parts with titles. The Haunted Hospital in New York. We invite the audience to listen along. The Haunted Hospital in New York. Part 2, I involuntarily turned around as if my brain knew that if I continued to look at that guy Henry's face, his eyes would pierce right through me. So my brain had to command my body to move. I dashed out of the room like a maniac. The first thing that crossed my mind was to find the on-duty nurse and ask her to come and check on my poor friend. As I sprinted from the room to the hallway, I heard footsteps, sounding like someone being dragged, and immediately called out, "Nurse, are you the nurse?" The footsteps drew closer, coming from behind me. I turned around. The last room at the end of the hallway still had its lights on, and there was a shadow lurking in the corridor. The figure approached my room, and the light from inside the room cast enough illumination for me to see the person advancing towards me. It was a young woman dressed as a nurse, holding a tray with a cup of medicine. Overjoyed, I ran up to her and exclaimed, "I'm so glad to see you. My friend has regained consciousness. Please come and see what's wrong with him. His arm is bleeding profusely." I quickly opened the door to the room, and the nurse followed my urgent instructions, entering and approaching the bedside. I trailed behind her, still feeling scared and hesitant to look. "No, your friend hasn't regained consciousness yet. Take another look." The nurse examined for a moment, then spoke as she stepped aside, allowing me to finally muster the courage to look. Strangely, where was the pool of blood on the floor? Where was the arm with bandages placed beside the bed? Both eyes were wide open, staring at me. Where were those bizarre occurrences? I boldly approached Henry's bed, only to find his eyes still tightly shut, his face still contorted, his hands still tightly wrapped in bandages, and the floor still spotlessly clean. Encountering a ghost. Oh my, I really encountered a ghost. I stared at Henry as he slept, his eyes blurred, as if on the verge of tears. What on earth was happening? Did some wandering spirit decide to play with me because it saw I was feeling down? No, I didn't need that. This is your first time on night duty at the hospital, isn't it? You're probably experiencing hallucinations due to stress, the nurse said softly. But I still couldn't take my eyes off Henry. How could I be so frightened to the point of losing my composure? Since birth, I had never known fear, or rather, nothing had ever scared me. I wasn't superstitious, but I had accompanied my mother to see a fortune teller once. My mother took the opportunity to have my fortune told as well. I obediently sat in front of a fortune teller while she needed my pulse. She said I had a mole under my big toe, which ancient people called a royal mole, indicating a life of fortune. She even elaborated that my future career would be bright. If I didn't become a director, I would at least become a team leader or supervisor. My parents could rely on me in their old age. Now what? I've encountered a ghost. All those assurances about my bright destiny have vanished into thin air. Firstly, I didn't become a director. Now I'm just a technician in the production workshop. If I'm lucky, I might get promoted to a supervisor, but that would be quite a feat. Secondly, I don't believe in those fortune-telling tricks. My fate is determined by my own choices. That fortune teller only knows how to pry money from my mother. I sighed deeply, then lifted my head, trying to cheer up the nurse. She was still stooped over, rearranging the cups in the medicine tray. I couldn't see her face, only her petite figure and slightly thin hands. Upon closer observation, I noticed a badge pinned to her uniform. Giselle, emergency room nurse. She must be of an ethnic minority. That's why I could smell the scent of herbs emanating from her. "Thank you, I've bothered you enough," I said awkwardly. The nurse heard me, but barely moved, still not lifting her head. She continued to stoop and arrange the medication boxes. "Is that you, Sister Giselle? Are you on duty just tonight or for the entire week?" I continued, trying to find some cheerful words to engage her in conversation. "I'm on duty for the whole week," the nurse replied softly. Suddenly, I saw her pick up a cup and turn around to pour water, the sound of water flowing briskly. Then she turned back and handed me the cup, saying, "Drink some water and continue your watch. Your friend won't wake up for a while. You've been through a lot too." I quickly took the cup of water and brought it to my lips, but as soon as it touched my mouth, A strong, metallic, foul odor wafted up from the cup, permeating my senses. It wasn't just metallic, it was also incredibly rancid, like a pot of pig's blood stew left to ferment. My throat clenched up in response to that smell, feeling like something was about to spew out of my mouth. I struggled to hold it back, not wanting to vomit here. Quickly putting the cup down, I blinked rapidly, clenched my lips shut, and swallowed everything I was thinking. Before giving it to the patient, what did they put in those medicinal concoctions? The smell of the cup wasn't any different from the smell of pig's blood soaking in a basin. Good heavens, I detest pig's blood stew. Not every patient enjoys pig's blood stew. What if they smell this specialty and start retching, vomiting it all out? Do the people here know anything about hygiene? If the cup smells like this, can they ensure the cleanliness of other surgical instruments? It took me a few seconds to catch my breath, still holding the cup of water. I intended to say a few words to the nurse, but as I looked around, she was nowhere to be seen. I stood dumbfounded in the room. The door was slightly ajar, suggesting she might have left while I was drinking. Hastily, I thought, at least she should have stayed to chat for a while. Now I was alone in the room again, and if that ghost came to haunt me again, what would I do? I hadn't really seen the nurse's face properly. She might be unmarried and hesitant to spend the night in the same room with someone like me. Suddenly, Henry coughed a few times, abruptly shattering my scattered thoughts. It was all because of this idiot. Out of nowhere, he had an accident. When he woke up tomorrow, I'd teach him a lesson. I was determined as such. Then I glanced at the clock on my phone. 12:35 a.m. When would dawn break so I could leave this dreadful place? At 4 a.m., Henry woke up. At that moment, I was sitting dazedly on the chair, unaware that he had awakened. After all the recent events, my nerves were so stirred up that I couldn't close my eyes. If I fell asleep, what if Henry opened his eyes and stared at me again? Or worse, if his arm suddenly started bleeding? I couldn't afford to fall asleep. Just a moment's lapse could lead to countless horrifying incidents. In reality, I nearly collapsed twice, each time barely managing to stay upright. Sitting still like this, trying to keep my mind alert, felt like torture. I had stood up and stretched 10 times, paced around the room 6 times, glanced at the door 4 times, counted the cars in the hospital parking lot twice, and even counted how many geckos were on the ceiling just now. Why was I looking so closely at the ceiling? Since the nurse left the room, I had this feeling from some corner, not necessarily from this room, that someone was watching me. I'm not overly sensitive, but if someone paid attention to me, somehow I would know. It's a kind of intuition only singles have. Finding answers to satisfy that intuition was difficult. I tried to forget about it, redirecting my mind to more interesting and practical things. But it was useless. My intuition kept nagging at me that someone was watching me. How? Startled, I jerked, my heart skipping a beat. Henry's hoarse voice had never sounded so intimate. After a moment of emotion, I quickly turned to look at my poor friend. He was awake now, his eyes half open, his mouth slightly agape, his nostrils inhaling and exhaling alternately. His face was still contorted. Perhaps my recent call had drained much of his strength. I immediately said, "You're awake, that's good. No need to say much. Disturbing your stitches would be troublesome. I understand your situation. Be more careful next time you walk." Luckily, someone brought you to the hospital. When Henry heard me mention the accident, he blinked, then turned to me, looking at me with a pained expression. What pain was there? The accident was his fault for reckless driving. If it had been someone else's fault, he could only resign himself to bad luck. With his limbs bandaged like this, it was indeed inconvenient. Perhaps he'd be afraid to go out at night from now on, considering this a painful lesson. "I met a ghost, man." "Huh?" "The nurse said this guy's head wasn't injured, so why is he suddenly talking nonsense like this? Or maybe he's feverish from the pain. When this guy was still sleeping, he even shouted something about avoiding and stopping, probably still feeling dizzy." I pretended to sympathize with Henry, trying to find comforting words. "It's just the night, you're probably hallucinating. I just encountered a ghost myself, right here in this room. Anyway, stop thinking about it. Just rest until tomorrow morning. I'll talk to the supervisor and arrange for you to take a break. Don't worry." Do you know why I had the accident? People said you crashed into the road divider. What happened exactly? I don't know. When I arrived, you were already lying here. I swerved to avoid someone on the road. After saying that, Henry fell silent. Swerving to avoid someone on the road? How could he end up hitting the median then? That road is wide open. Even 3 motorbikes and a car driving side by side fit comfortably. Moreover, it's not crowded at night, so why would he have to veer onto the shoulder to avoid anyone? Were you drinking? If you don't believe me, I don't know what else to say. Then how do you expect me to believe you? I have passed that road many times. It is not narrow. Why did you crash into the median? That person was walking against the flow of traffic, but Henry frowned, his voice faltering, indicating there was still something unclear in his mind. Walking against the flow of traffic would make it easier to avoid. You can see which direction they're coming from, and if they're swaying too much, you can just stop and let them pass. They should be responsible for avoiding vehicles. The fewer issues, the better. Henry should understand this more than anyone. But that person wasn't walking, wasn't running. I don't understand. What do you mean? As I was driving, suddenly I saw someone walking on the road against the flow of traffic. When I first saw them, I thought they were more than 100 meters away. But before I could slow down, I saw them standing in front of the motorcycle's headlights. And did you tell them to move? Yeah, I shouted to move, but they ignored it and even rushed towards my motorcycle. It was only a few seconds and they were already close to my bike. Since I was still running at 40 kilometers per h, I immediately swerved, causing the bike to hit the median. Did you stay conscious afterward? Henry fell silent again, his face changing, looking somewhat pale. His story sent a chill down my spine. Who would dash into a motorcycle like that? Only a lunatic, and they were running too fast. I don't see them anymore. So when you look back, they were gone? Yeah, it was just me lying on the road. Now it was my turn to stay silent. Do you believe me? Henry asked involuntarily, looking at me with a sincere expression, as if he were trying to make me believe what he just said. Believe him? I wasn't there when the accident happened. I'm not Henry, let alone the person walking against traffic. How could I believe him? But Henry wasn't the type to blame external circumstances for his actions. Whatever he did, good or bad, he would take responsibility for it. And if he wanted to make up a story, he could come up with something more believable. There was no need for such fantastical tales. I don't know. Are you sure someone was walking against traffic? I'm sure because there's a curve in that stretch of road, so I was observing very carefully. It's not easy to drive on a mountain road at night. Indeed, there wasn't a residential road. It crossed a hill connecting the industrial zone with the villages in the township. It wasn't difficult to traverse, but it was deserted, especially at night. I was certain that from 8 p.m. to 5 a.m., no vehicles would pass through that road. Yet someone was walking there at 9 p.m., which was quite strange. But that was all in the past now. Even if ghosts were real, Henry didn't die. They say encountering a ghost means it wants to take your life. But if you don't die, what's there to fear? I felt like the matter had been resolved satisfactorily. Now my friend just needed to rest for a few days. There was no need to dwell on this further. All right, don't think about it anymore. You're fine, that's what matters. How do you feel now? Is your leg still hurting? Let me go call the nurse to come check on you. Henry just nodded, probably still not overthinking about the accident. I told him to wait while I went to call the nurse. Part 2 has concluded. Please remember to subscribe to the channel to watch Part 3. Thank you very much. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.